Time is the intangible measurement of the past, the present, and the future, a linear continuum that encompasses the ambivalt nature of existence. Yet for writer-director Christopher Nolan, time is a concept that has become synonymous with his own name. Acclaimed by critics and revered by audiences alike, the British filmmaker has managed to create blockbuster cinema through the prism of an art house sensibility, one that is driven by his distinct fascination with time. Throughout his filmography, from his original feature debut Following to his latest brain teaser Tenet, Nolan has managed to weave his obsession with temporality into both the form and content of his work, challenging audiences' perceptions of what the medium can do. He understands that cinema itself is built on the illusion of time, the apparatus of the camera allowing us to perceive its flow merely through progression of imagery. Thus, by focusing on the works of Dunkirk, Interstellar, and Tenet, I will deconstruct how Christopher Nolan engineers time as a creative tool in cinematic storytelling to multiple effect. Each individual feature providing different examples of how Nolan can implement time narratively, thematically, and practically in his art. Ultimately, alongside the aid of relevant scholarly writing, highlighting the entwined relationship between time and cinema realized to its true potential by an auteur of his craft.
What do you see? Home.
To begin with, I will examine Nolan's historical epic, 2017's Dunkirk, and analyse how the director is able to distill his preoccupation with time by employing it within structure as a narrative framing device, allowing the viewer to assimilate itself with the film's unique perspective. As one of the director's shortest films to date, Dunkirk moves as a tightly paced operatic thriller that assumes the point of view of the soldiers stranded on the eponymous beach during World War II. As his first film based on real events, the story remains grounded in tense action and a palpable dread that permeates their fight for survival, never deviating away from their singular embodiment of the evacuation. In doing so, the filmmaker is able to extrapolate a subjective experience of this vast operation into a 90-minute film, homing in on the emotional aspect of survival through the language of suspense. Consequently, the film is limited in dialogue to greater allow storytelling that is removed from the mechanics of plot and is instead motivated by achieving the sensory in cinematography and music. Yet most notably, Nolan employs a unique temporal structure that enables his audience to fulfill an empathetic response of detached subjective experiences woven together into one narrative. Whereas his earlier film, 2000's Memento, utilises a puzzling reverse chronology to withhold information from the audience and displace the viewer with the same sense of amnesia its protagonist suffers from, Dunkirk's structure is instead split into three core perspectives that occur over three separate time frames. These are, number 1, the mole, 1 week, number 2, the sea, 1 day, and number 3, the air, 1 hour.
I think cinema is a wonderful tool, wonderful medium for exploring our perceptions of time. And the perception of time, is one of the things that really emphasizes or can emphasize point of view in storytelling.
By braiding together three disparate timelines that converge into one by the film's third act, the viewer is given a multifaceted viewpoint of Dunkirk. Audiences are positioned as a Spitfire pilot, a sailor, and a soldier, fragmented groups that are unified via intercut scenes that convey their singular perspectives. Film is a medium that can control how we perceive time, and Nolan distorts time structurally in order to encompass and emphasize the subjectivity of their experiences. We become directly engaged in the intensity that their characters inhabit, actively jumping to the various temporal moments that place us in their own point of view. Moreover, the separate time frames are arranged to collaborate in building momentum and suspense, creating a rhythm in their alternating dominance, and therefore the viewer is still able to comprehend the narrative emotionally, even when lost in temporality.
Everybody ready to say goodbye to our solar system? To our galaxy? Here we go.
In an interview with NPR in 2020, Christopher Nolan states, "What I'd like to say about my fascination with time is that I've always lived it, and as I get older, as my kids get older, your sense of time changes." He continues to elaborate on the acceleration of time and its indifference to the fleeting nature of human existence, a sentiment that his 2014 space odyssey, Interstellar, carries at its very core. The film takes place in the near future, where the Earth has become a dust bowl ravaged by climate change, and humanity finds itself on the brink of starvation because of this. Its protagonist Cooper, an ex-pilot played by Matthew McConaughey, is enlisted by Michael Caine's Professor Brand to lead a NASA expedition through the inexplicable wormhole in space. He believes their salvation may be found in the solar system that awaits on the other side, one where 3 potentially habitable planets could offer the human race a second chance at survival. At the heart of the picture is Cooper's relationship to his young daughter Murph and their shared love for one another. It propels him to embark on this journey through time and space, spurred by the realization that if he doesn't, it may lead to her and humanity's demise. However, Murph is unable to get past her feelings of abandonment and is unable to see her father's truly altruistic motivations, compounded by the uncertainty of his return. In their fraught final moments before his departure, Cooper must come to terms with potentially never seeing his daughter again. In doing so, he realizes the tragic reality of time's transience and ultimately reveals the film's underlying conflict. To quote its director, "If there is an antagonist in Interstellar, it is time itself."
Hey, I love you forever. You hear me? I love you forever, and I'm coming back.
As Cooper and his team of Doctors Brand, Doyle and Romley traverse through the wormhole and visit various planets, they experience extreme time dilation due to the gravitational pull of a nearby black hole called Gargantua. Therefore, on Miller's planet, time operates at a different rate to that of Earth's, meaning that 1 hour there will equate to 7 years back home. Already a precious commodity, time becomes a currency they cannot afford to waste, and for Cooper, each passing second on one planet pushes him further away from his own daughter. This is illustrated on Cooper's return to the spaceship Endurance after leaving Miller's planet, where its gigantic, inhabitable waves have marooned him for longer than intended, and the character is forced to deal with the consequences of relative time. Despite only a fleeting presence on Miller's planet, he discovers that 23 years has elapsed since, and years of video messages from his family have been left in his absence. This heartbreaking revelation is underlined by a final message from Murph, who had thus far been missing from the recordings, and has now grown to an adult of the same age her dad was when he left. Jacqueline Furby explains in Chapter 17 of The Cinema of Christopher Nolan Imagining the Impossible that science fiction time travel narratives often encourage a notion of temporal mobility, yet here, Cooper is just as powerless to the flow of time as we are in the real world. Although the hero is finally reunited with an elderly version of his daughter by the film's end, he is still unable to travel back and undo all the lost time for a younger Murph. As Dr. Brown reminds him earlier,
"Time is relative, okay? It can stretch and it can squeeze, but it can't run backwards."
except in the physics of Tenet,
Well, I've seen too much.
it can. Nolan's globe-trotting espionage thriller from 2020 is arguably the filmmaker's cinematic synthesis to his fascination with time, creating a story in which time presents itself both forward and backwards as a physical reality. The world of Tenet parallels our own almost identically, but in this universe, a scientist from the future has created an equation that allows objects and people to travel backwards in time through a process called inversion. However, Kenneth Branagh's oligarch Sata wants to use this equation for global annihilation, and the protagonist must fight against time to save the world.
We're the people saving the world from what might have been.
Thus, Tenet functions as a conceptually ambitious vehicle for the filmmaker's temporal fixation, whereby employing foundational filmmaking techniques like running the film back, the director is able to create imagery that succinctly encapsulates the cinematic possibilities of time. This is showcased in one of the film's most extravagant set pieces, where the protagonist and Robert Pattinson's Neil must perform a vehicular operation to steal what they believe to be plutonium from an armoured truck on the Estonian freeway. Despite successful completion of the mission, they soon witness an approaching SUV moving backwards in time and are suddenly engaged in a high-speed pursuit of numerous temporal proportions. Sator, having gained knowledge of the operation's success in the future, has inverted himself to travel backwards in time, and with this knowledge, steals the plutonium from the characters in the very moment they stole it to begin with. The sequence is by definition high-octane in presentation, but most significantly, Nolan lures the audience into the action before it has even begun, utilising visual cues that later pay off through the subversion of cause and effect.
But cause comes before effect.
No, that's just the way we see time.
At the beginning of the scene, as each individual vehicle instrumental to the mission takes their carefully selected position on the freeway, Neil and the protagonist prepare themselves in their BMW. However, just as momentum begins to build upon entering the freeway, the camera purposely steers away from the characters in the car and pans over to a curiously cracked wing mirror on the right. By already understanding the laws of Tenet established throughout the narrative, its signification from the camera's direction poses to the audience that the mirror isn't just broken, but the catalyst of its impair has yet to happen.
It hasn't happened yet.
In the comprehension that the results of actions are often shown before they have been performed, Nolan creates suspense in the anticipation of uncovering answers to these clear anomalies. This is a concept that is first demonstrated in the opening scene, where the protagonist discovers a bullet hole from a gun that is yet to be shot, only to then see its origin happen in reverse by a mysterious inverted figure. Tom Gunning states, in the Temporality of the Cinema of Attractions, the temporality of an attraction is limited to the pure present tense of its appearance, but the announcing gesture creates a temporal frame of expectation in the of suspense. It differs from diegetic suspense in being concerned less with how an event will develop than with when an event will occur. In explaining the analogy of a magician who draws our eye to an ostentatious display, we then recognise how Nolan supplants this conventional act with an inversion. The form remains the same. He points us towards the broken mirror, and in due time reveals it was broken by the inverted SUV that snaps it back into repair. Yet by altercating diegetic temporality, the film technically shows us the reveal before the display, the effect before the cause, and thus we question how it came to be. Unlike Dunkirk, this positions the viewer to engage with storytelling in new ways, whilst maintaining a familiar rhythm that empowers the audience to grasp Tenet's unique rendering of time. Inversion creates not only creative spectacle, but also invites active participation from its director as a dynamic device to story. In conclusion, Christopher Nolan isn't just preoccupied with time and how it works from an individual perspective, but it truly motivates his very being as a filmmaker. Throughout his filmography, he is always trying to push the boundaries of what cinema can do, both practically and emotionally, through the application of temporal design. By examining Dunkirk, Interstellar, and Tenet, and how they each contribute to his process structurally, narratively, and contextually, I will hopefully have been able to demonstrate how Nolan's cinema is a cinema of time, one that exists across a continuum of the past, the present, and the future. Just perhaps not strictly in that order.